Good morning. I'm Winnie Wexler, Executive Director of the Anthony and Jeannie Pritzker Family Foundation and Pritzker Foster Care Initiative. I'm here to welcome you to Foster Together Network's Spring Forward series and today's session with Dr. Eshel Williams, where she'll be discussing disruption and prevention, a family systems approach to minimize trauma. We're so grateful to Foster Together Network's funders, which in addition to our foundation include the Ralph M. Parsons Foundation, Weingart Foundation, W.M. Keck Foundation, for sponsoring the backbone team at Big Orange Squat, who's producing this series and event. And thanks to the UCLA Pritzker Center for strengthening children and families for lending a helping hand to today's session. For those of you who haven't attended earlier convenings, Foster Together Network is a collaborative of public and private partners here in Los Angeles, committed to helping recruit and retain resource families. We're a network that bridges the county, which includes the Department of Children and Family Services, the Office of Child Protection, Probation, Department of Mental Health, and the community, which includes foster family and adoption agencies, parents, caregivers, faith community leaders, and funders. Today's session focuses on what we in our respective roles can do to better support stable, nurturing resource families and minimize transitions from one family to another. According to the Children's Law Center of California, youth entrusted to the county are separated and joined an average of 5 times while in DCFS care. Each of these moves can potentially create a new trauma, new scars, and make healing and healthy attachments more challenging. Dr. Eshel Williams has paved the way for us to be thoughtful about the words we use related to children and families. Her strength-based, human-centered approach to foster care recognizes how the entire family system is involved in the experience of foster care and how involving all the family members in the process enables the strengths of the full family to emerge in support of the young person who has joined the family, and also mitigates the risks that can lead to disruption. Dr. Williams holds a doctorate in organizational management and consulting, is a licensed marriage and family therapist, author, curriculum developer, and trainer educator. As a birth child raised in a family that fosters, Dr. Williams pulls from her almost 4 decades of combined lived, professional, and academic experience to provide a uniquely nuanced perspective to the family systems approach. Dr. Williams?
Thank you, Winnie, very much for that warm welcome, and welcome all the participants. I really appreciate you for being here. I am going to share some information with you today that is near and dear to my heart. As Winnie said, I am the child or birth child of foster, adoptive, and kinship parents for all of my life. And I bring my personal and professional information and experience to this topic. So I'm really, really glad to present it here with you today. And hopefully we gain some really amazing information. I really want to thank the Foster Together Network for raising such an amazing challenge, right? So the challenge for us is to really change the mindset and look at disruption in a different way. So I've been able to partner and in collaboration with them in order to do just that. So without further ado, we're going to go ahead and get started. Just remember that you can use the chat feature if you have anything that you want to add or you have a comment that you want to make, and I will go ahead and check that along the way. And without further ado, we're going to get ready, get started, get going. So the title of today's presentation that the Foster Together Network and I have collaborated on is Disruption Prevention and Intervention, a family systems approach to minimizing trauma. As we think about the trauma that may be created through fostering and the separation of children from their parents or their family, and then the joining with children into other families, that foster family or that resource family, we really have to think of it as a dynamic process. And I continue to say family, and you'll hear me stress that throughout the presentation, because we know that it's not the home that heals or hurts the child, it's the family that is living in that home that does. So we always want to try to figure out, how do we find ourselves on the helping side versus the hurting side of a child's life? And not just the child that's coming into care, but all of the children in the family. So we're going to go over some objectives. So the first few objectives is to share the rationale for this presentation. I'm also going to clarify how resource family development and support is integral to disruption prevention and intervention. We're going to look at reframing the focus from foster families and children, or to foster families and children, instead of foster parents and foster homes. So what we see is that's represented in not only agency culture, because the culture tells us that there's a child that comes into care that needs us or that needs a family. And then there are parents out there that are willing to support that child. So what we know is, and what the reframe is we're looking at the full foster family and all of the children that are there. So we change the agency culture in a way so that it's more encompassing. We look at the language that we use, and we'll talk a bit about strength-based language, and I'll show you some of that. Instead of using the language that's just been passed down, we will use then language that is more representative and humanistic. We're looking at policy, the practice, the articles, reports, and media. So in all of the ways that we are talking about foster children or resource parents, we are going to then shift and start talking about foster families and take a look at what that really means. We're also going to clarify how the resource family experience that becoming a resource family, serving, and the time that you're doing that, and as well as ending those relationships, and how that impacts all of the children, birth children, adopted children, and foster children that are in the family. And we're going to think about how it requires best practices for disruption prevention and intervention. And lastly, we're going to look at the purpose of building a family systems-based conceptual framework. So it is our approach that will change and that I will present to you, the approach of looking at the family as a full system and how this helps us to decrease disruptions, minimize trauma, and help increase retention and recruitment. So I want to tell you a little bit about how the Foster Together Network and myself came to be. So the Foster Together Network is a group of philanthropic organizations, as well as DCFS and other individuals, DMH, that have come to the table to really take a look at some of the challenges that have gone on or continue to go on in terms of disruption prevention, intervention, and recruitment. And they have what are called North Star goals and shared metrics. So as this project came to be, we looked at some of the goals, and actually one of the goals, and I'll share it with you now. So we looked at how we can strengthen and coordinate foster family recruitment and retention efforts to better meet child and youth needs in Los Angeles County. So we are a really, really huge county, and there's got a foster family agency as well as Department of Children and Family Services, and sometimes we have things where we're doing things a little bit differently. But what we want to know is, how do we best come together to streamline the processes that we have in an effort to boost recruitment, to sustain retention, right? So to make sure that we keep the families that we have, and which then would decrease disruption. So the 4 solutions in motion from the Foster Together Network of disruption focuses on 4, but we were focused on in this project on 2. So it's improving placement and family bonding system. So the matching process, the visitation, and when we think about visitation, we really want to change to the new language and talk about family time and how families spend quality time together, and then meeting needs. And that second one is to grow coordination and best practices among FFAs, county departments, as well as Department of Mental Health. So some disruption implications and impact. We know that disruption not only impacts the child that's in care and the family that they were separated from initially, but we want to take a look and broaden our scope to think about the children who join families, as well as the children that are already there. So children within the resource family by birth, by adoption, by kinship, or in other status. We also think about birth families and how birth families of the children that are in care are impacted. We want to really have an empathetic heart for the parents, as well as for their siblings and extended family members. So as we look at the Families First Services Prevention Act and some of those implications, what the Family First Services Prevention Act says is that we are going to try to prevent families from joining in or coming into DCFS, right? For being they may be on the radar because something is happening, but what we want to do is we want to prevent them from actually becoming and needing formalized support through foster care. And when we do that, then it really looks more like family preservation than it does family foster care because we are looking at how do we keep families together from that initial separation. And then we're looking at the resource family, the parents in the family, the children, all of the children, extended family member and friends. So that really is a broad scope when we think about not only the child that's coming into care, but the family that they're joining, as well as all of the individuals that are impacted by that. Because when we think about family foster care, it's not only the parent that's taking care of the child, but it really is the team. And that brings me to agency staff and leadership. So line staff and the social workers that are working with families, the supervisors, the social workers, and thinking about how do we enforce best practice as well as think in fidelity. The managers, which we're looking at an org chart now, so it's the managers that support the supervisors, administrators, and then the boards of agencies. So all of the agency staff and leadership, we're thinking, how do we get on the same page so that every single person is speaking not only the same language, but has the same expectations and the ways in which we look at in our philosophy about families. And then we've got agency community relationships. That's foster family agencies, Department of Children and Family Services, Department of Mental Health, courts, our faith-based partners, because we really need them in our network, the schools that the children attend, and others who need to work together for shared mission and goals. So when we think about this slide in particular and all the people that are listed here, we have to know that if we're not speaking the same language and if we don't have the same philosophy and the start point, which then points to a model of practice, then maybe we're doing things that are not complementary to one another for the child. Now I want to take a little bit of a deep dive here because we use language that in social services and in this arena that we really don't know where that language comes from. And we do it and use it because the person that taught us or the person that trained us used it. And we also do it because, you know, it's been passed down from generation to generation of social services and social workers. So I'm going to take a look, and we are going to take a look, and I'll give you some examples of the strength-based language shift that I'm asking to be made. And not that I'm asking, but really is because the children deserve it. So when we thought about and strength-based language, it really was a concept or is a concept that comes out of the Child Welfare League of America. And what they really, it's embedded in is the PRIDE model of practice. And it is a model that teaches foster and resource parents how to be just that. And as we think about that strength-based language, they were able to meet with youth in care. And they asked, if you could hear a person speak about you in a certain way, what would you want to hear them saying? How would you want them to reference you? So a lot of this, the new language shifts comes from youth in care that were able to tell individuals at the Child Welfare League that this is how they want to be represented. And when they overhear people talking about them, this is also how they would like to hear people referring to them. So the first, and I want to recognize that it is National Foster Care Month. So it's foster care awareness. And in the shift to the language change, the green, everything in the green on the left-hand side is the language that we want you to start using. And everything in the red is the language that we've already been using. So that red, that National Foster Care Month, we want to change it to National Foster Family Care Month, right? Or National Family Foster Care Month, because it is the family that will either heal or hurt the child. So that next one says homes. That home is a 4-letter word, bed is a 4-letter word, and we want to really take those out of our vocabulary, because it's not the home that heals or hurts the child, it's the family. So as we think about all of those people from the last slide that's encompassed in family, then we need to know that each one of those family members has voice and choice, and I'll talk about that a bit later, into the fostering process, into education about fostering, so that they know about and recognize the trauma that can be associated with the separation of children from families. So the next one says placement, and I'm sure you've heard this, and it's children being referenced as placements. It is the place that they go being referenced to as a placement. And we want to really demystify that, because placements are really objects. And we know that children are not objects. And as they're not, we want to humanize them, and we call them children and not placements. And we call the places that they're going families. And we make sure that we're talking about it if it's a care facility and not a group home, because you're grouping a whole bunch of people together that may have some challenges, not only living together, but we're talking about care facilities, a place where children are cared for. We often hear children referenced as cases. I was working with this case, when what we really mean is we were working with a child or children and parents. So I can ask you how many children you have on your caseload, and that's far different than how many cases you're working with. So if you had cases, you might have 14 cases. But if I ask you how many children and families are within, that you're talking about, there may be a large number of them. So 20, 30, 40 people that are represented in those cases. So what we want to do is we want to know that children are not cases, and they're also not placements. And that next one, you've heard me say it once before. So we also say children are placed in a home. And instead of children being placed in a home, we got this knowledge from our colleague at Children's Bureau, Cindy Stogel, and we really thank her for really pointing out that children aren't placed in homes, children join families. And as they join families, we get to think about, what does that joining look like? What is the joining and what does it mean? Because we need families that have transferable skills to meet the needs of children that have been impacted by trauma and loss, that might have some behaviors that go along with the impact. And when those behaviors show up, we need individuals that can actually care for them. And the four walls in a home cannot do that. The only people that can do that is the family. The next one talks about children being removed. There's an amazing video, you can find it on YouTube, and it is called Removed. And the producers of that video did a great job showing us the experience of a child that is removed from a home. But what we want to know is what's most impactful is the separation. Not only what happened, but how it happened, when it happened, and how the child is feeling about it. And I'll give you a couple last ones. And one of them is, we always talk in social services about visitation. And sometimes we like to think about visitation as being, we usually visit somebody that can't visit us back. That's usually maybe in a cemetery because someone's passed away, and we've had a lot of that go on recently. Or it's visiting somebody maybe in the hospital. But we don't want to give that idea and lend that idea to foster care. What we really want to say and we think about is family time. The quality time that children get to spend with their parents and what that family time looks like. So there are phases to family time, things that should be done, and debriefing and making sure that we are taking into consideration all of the things that are happening. The child has been separated. So as I go back to separated, the children told us that garbage and snow are removed, not children. And as garbage and snow, they don't want to feel like or be placed in the same position, because there's a trash truck that comes around on a regular basis every week to remove the garbage and things that we don't want. And we don't want to give children the implication that that's them. So one last one, and if you look at the bottom of this slide, sometimes we attribute the characteristic or the thing that's happened, the diagnosis, and we couple that with the child instead of separating that. And what it looks like is that one on the bottom says child prostitute or CSEC kid. We had the opportunity to write for Fostering Families Today magazine, myself and colleagues, and different colleagues every time. And as we write the words matter, strength-based language articles, then we give you a little bit of the rationale as to why it is for the language shift, as well as we had the opportunity to write about commercial sexually exploited children. And in a lot of the literature, they talk about child prostitution, and they label children child prostitutes, and they talk about CSEC kids, or sometimes in mental health, we will say, oh, an ADHD kid versus the child that is impacted by, or the child that has a diagnosis of. So what we want to do is humanize this person. And we were talking about children impacted by commercial and sexual exploitation, no longer blaming the victim or blaming the survivor for what they have experienced. So, in that, no more hard to place children. That's old language, and it is a blame the victim kind of mentality. So, what we think about and what the shift is, because as social services, we've taken on the responsibility of doing and saying we could do what parents couldn't, so when we separate children from them. So, what we know is children are not hard to place, but safe and nurturing families are hard to find for children that have experienced trauma and loss. I really, really encourage you to look into getting Fostering Families Today magazine, because every single article, and it only comes out quarterly, but there's every single excuse me, every single magazine that comes out, there is an article about strength-based language and helping us in social services to make that shift. So at this point in the presentation, I'm going to share with you information that we gathered from a family that I had the opportunity to meet at the National Foster Parent Association conference quite a few years ago. And this family was asked to be here and to really allow you to get a glimpse of what it is they think, how they feel about fostering and the impact that it's had on their family. Arvell Hawkins, which is she's been a resource parent for quite a few years now, as well as her daughter Christine, are going to share with us some of their thoughts and feelings. So take a look, or actually a listen. You'll see them come on the screen. There's some beautiful pictures of them that they shared with us. But just know that it was really an emotional process for them to record this, and they were going to record it live, but instead they just did the audio for us. So we're going to take a listen to them and think about what it is that they're saying, how you can integrate what they're saying into practice. And you may have some thoughts, questions, and some feelings. And if we were in person, I would ask you to share them with me. You can share them in the chat. And I really, really appreciate you taking the time to listen.
Hi, my name is Arvell Hawkins. I am a resource parent, have been since 1994, off and on, steady since 2011. We have had over 45 children that have come into our home. Currently, we have 4 children of our own. All of them now are adults. The one has been impacted by us fostering children more than any of our 3 children was our youngest, who is Christine Hawkins. So I have some questions here that has been placed before me, and I will read the questions and then try my best to answer them. So looking back on how this foster parenting has impacted my family, first and foremost, I would have made sure that the children that came into our home were children not so much as a match for Christine or for our home, but children that background was not going to impact Christine or take her into a place that she wasn't mature enough for those things that perhaps the foster child had been exposed to. The second thing that I wish I could have done is taking the time to really sit down with my family and not just listen, but also be observant to those nonverbals. Well, just with Christine, I wish I had paid more attention to her nonverbal, her body language, her facial expressions, things that, was things that was there, but I just didn't have a place to put it or didn't have words for it at the time. So I wish I could have paid closer attention to Christine. Looking in retrospect, gosh, When I saw on the day that Christine expressed how she felt about foster children coming into her home, man, I wish I could have just stopped the clock right there, rewind, cut and delete, paste, whatever, some of the things that she had gone through. And knowing now that some of those things were trauma, and she had been traumatized by some of the children, and even with the social workers, how they responded to Christine. It was as though she didn't exist. The children were their concern, the foster children, but it was never a concern for Christine. In fact, maybe only one or two ever came through and asked, "How's Christine? How is Mr. Hawkins? Or how are you doing?" Speaking of myself. What is the positive that came out of knowing how Christine has been impacted? Looking back on how it impacted Christine, the positive was the day I was at a conference and Christine was just so emotional that day, and she had gave me the security knowing that she was going to be okay in her room. I took a break and went in her room, and I didn't see her as the little girl I had been seeing. I saw someone that was hurt, someone that was like, "Mommy, I'm here." And I stopped everything. I stopped everything and embraced her. Try my best to really get into how she was feeling as much as possible to understand her as a child. And gosh, I wept along with her, and I was very apologetic. I apologized to her for not seeing the signs, not seeing things that were oblivious to others or even to myself. And so positive is that we had a good lunch that day, and she is number one on the list. Gosh, we got children now, but it stops for her. It really, time, everything stops for her. I don't ever want her to feel that I'm at the back of the line and nobody's paying attention to me. What I would love for workers to know is that our children, they belong to us. This is our bloodline. We open up our home, we open up our heart. I've had social workers that have come into my home and it's treated my children, my husband, and even myself as though I'm invisible. The only concern they had is the children they had placed in our home. And that was disheartening because it wasn't until 2016 that one of the social workers came to our home and gave Christine a purse for Christmas. And she was weeping uncontrollably. And I said, "Christine, what is going on?" This social worker was the very first social worker whom had acknowledged that Christine existed, that she lived in that house, that she was our child. And so for the social workers, it's imperative that they don't exclude our children, our biological children, our grandchildren, our niece, our family. We don't put our family to the side to take care of someone else's family. Who does that? But that's how the social workers has treated us down through the year. Back your children off and do everything you can. Run to the therapy, run here, run there, run. Our biological children, they just as important to us as the children that is being brought into our home. And not at any time are our children to be looked at or not looked at as though they are invisible. So, gosh, yes.
I wonder what you heard and how it impacted you. I know that when I listened to the recording myself, I had to listen to it in part because I wasn't able to listen to it fully without becoming emotional. And hearing mom talk about what she wished she knew and what she wished she could have done different in terms of stopping time, wanting to go back to do things different on her child's behalf, on her family's behalf. She talked a bit about her family feeling invisible in the face of social services and the process of what's going on, as if who we're focusing on is the child that joins the family and not everybody that's already there. So now I'm going to get into talking about the impact of disruption, the research findings. And there really is a unique finding here. And we can talk about and have for years about disruption in multiple ways. And as we talk about disruption, we usually blame the newest person that entered the family, and that's the child that's joining. We talk about their behavior. We talk about the things that they bring with them. We talk about the impact that their parents have on them and having those visits, right? We talk about that all the time. But there's another aspect which we want to elevate, and it's talking about the impact on the full family as well as the impact on the children that are already there. So we're talking about birth children of resource parents or foster parents. We're also talking about children that are in foster care status that are in families, as well as children that were previously adopted. So think about all the children that are there and the differing stages and ages that they may be at that time and how this can potentially impact them. So what we know is children have and bring feelings, behaviors, culture, fears, hopes to the families that they join, as well as foster family members. All of the members have feelings, behaviors, culture, and expectations when they foster. And it's really important to know and understand that disruption, by definition, is an overused response to the imbalance that's created when each family member is not prepared and supported. So I'm going to say that one more time. Disruption is the overused response to the imbalance created when each family member in a foster family is not prepared and supported. So think about pre-service training. The pre-service training is only inclusive of parents. We may have a family assessment that takes place, and that's a one-time asking of parents, how does your child feel about this? Have you told them about it? And maybe a one-time interview of all of the children that are in the family and other family members. How do they feel about the process? And there's no ongoing support and development of children that are there or other family members, even though parents are mandated to have so many continuing education hours throughout the time that they foster. And I really must elevate that there does not exist anywhere nationally, statewide, a curriculum that is inclusive or mandates that children be included in the education process while parents are fostering or while their family is becoming a foster family. This has been elevated in the research and really wanted to think about how important is it to bring all the family members along so that when a child is joined with the family and we know there's going to be some imbalance that's created there, how do we gain that balance back if no one knows exactly what's happening? The research says that birth children are first to experience the impact of fostering. They're usually the ones that are told to share, to welcome the child into the family, as well as to be a friend to the child. And what they don't know sometimes is why it is that the child is coming to care. They don't know and understand what trauma is. And when we don't explain it to them, then they may have a lot of questions. Usually children are the first to go public and give an ultimatum. I don't know if this is working out. I don't know if I want to be this kind of family. There's some challenges going on here. We're not getting along. And sometimes when they go public with that information, foster parents are reluctant to hear their concerns. And if they hear their concerns, sometimes they don't know what to do about it, either because they haven't had those conversations before. The conversations are difficult to have. And they don't want anyone in social services, social workers or otherwise, to think that they don't know how to support their family or especially the children that were already there. So sometimes it goes unsaid, and parents feel guilty because of disruption or some of the things that they can't control. They feel guilty after the disruption because they did not know how to keep the child join with the family. And this last point here, super important. If parents don't know how to have those conversations and they're really struggling within their family to try to gain that balance, the foster care agency staff are the last to know. So you could have been with the family a day prior, and then the next day you get a 14-day notice or someone's calling and saying, I need some support, and the support that I need is for you to, to separate the child from our family. The things that are happening are not okay, and I can't maintain them anymore. And sometimes they even say the impact that this is having on my birth kids or the kids that are already here is too much for them to sustain. And the agency staff are in a position to say, I was just there. Why didn't you talk to me about it? So what we have to know is there is maybe some fear associated with disruption, with imbalance, with those things that they cannot control in the moment. And we have to be responsive to that. So when we think about the approach, right, the approach is not just parents and children, the approach is overarching, and it is encompassing of the full family, because every single family member may be having a challenge. And the only person that's there to resolve that challenge at some point may be the parent. The research findings, and these are, they come from maybe some dated research, but it's still significant to think about that the difficulties between foster children, foster parents, own children, right? So the children that are already there was given in 75% of disruptions, right? In foster family disruptions, it was given in that was the reason for 75% of disruptions within the first 3 months. If we know that a statistic like this exists, why wouldn't we do something within the first 3 months, as well as prior to the child joining the family, to prevent it? This was also given in 56% of the families that disrupted within 9 months of the child joining the family. So these are huge numbers to think about families disrupting because of some imbalance that's created that we don't talk to them about, we don't teach about, and families may not be aware of. So in the ask is the philosophy shift and the mindset shift that says I have to, and we have the responsibility of being aware that families are the imbalance is going to happen. They may feel overwhelmed. We go in and we ask, so what's happening today? So they understand that we know that there are going to be challenges and that we're here with them to support them when the challenging times happen. That next bullet says the foster care experience can be seen as a blow to the foster parents' own children. The children are expected to open up their homes. They're expected to share their physical things, their physical space, materials, and emotional resources with children. And this one here says, who often seem not to appreciate what they're given. I want to talk about that for a second because it's really important for us to recognize that there is no child. There's not a child on the planet that exists that we should expect that they should be appreciative to be in a family where they receive love. It is a child's right to be in a family that is safe, nurturing, and enduring, that is intended to last a lifetime, where they feel that they are a part of that family, and where they are supported and nurtured. So when we think about that appreciation comment, it's not that children should be appreciative. It is looking at it from another child's lens that says, I've given up all of these things, and I don't know what I'm going to get in return. So some of the other findings in the research, children that were already in the family were known as, or became known as, the unknown soldiers of foster care. And as the unknown soldiers of foster care, meaning that they're overlooked, that They're a voiceless population. They're separated from the process. Sometimes they're not a part of the parents or the agency's decision to foster, adopt, or to stop that fostering process. And if they're not a decision maker in the process, then they might have some feelings about what happens as a result of not being able to be included in that decision. When the child joins the family and when they get there, everything that's happening is inclusive of this child that was not able to have any decision making power or a voice in the process. So think about that. Things are happening to you, and you don't get to weigh in on what's going on. Children are often unprepared for and uninformed about fostering experience. I said once before that children often don't know why children are in care. And that's inclusive of the child that's in the foster family as well as the child that's joining the family. They might know that there are some incidents and how things played out at home, but they really don't understand or know about the foster care process. They don't know if the family that they're joining is safe. And we have to understand that from their perspective, safety is personal. And from the other children's perspective, right? This family and the safety of the family is personal for them. So we're talking about felt safety. How do we make sure that the children feel safe throughout the process? And that there's a lack of support and training necessary to adjust to the fostering experience. So what would it take for us to be inclusive of a child, or that at least the child's perspective, in pre-service training and in-service training and ongoing development? If we could ask an additional question from an additional person when we go out to have a consultation with the family, and not a visit, but a consultation. When we go out and have a consultation with the family, how many more questions can we ask about how everyone is doing in that family so that they feel included? So children and other children that are already in the family are seen as having an abundance and they can share. And what we know is that sometimes children are selfish, and that's okay, because what they don't know is where the next might be coming from. They might have favorite things that they don't want to share, and we understand sibling rivalry and the fact that it happens. And it doesn't only happen in families that foster. It happens in families that have biological siblings. It happens when you bring another child into the family by birth. So as we think about what happens in having to share, do we want to see children as having an abundance, or do we want to see them as just or having just enough, so that we know that we have to do maybe more when other children join the family? They're viewed as part of the family rather than unique individuals. So if I just lump everybody together and I ask parents how they're feeling, and then I attribute those feelings to the children, I might be wrong. So if I ask a parent, how are you doing today? And she says, or he says, I'm fine. And if I take that as how other people in the family feel, then I might be on the wrong track. We're going to have the opportunity to hear from Christine, Marvell Hawkins' daughter. And this is the difference between asking parents how they feel and asking children, because her perspective on this might be very different. And the research says the perspective of children is very different than that of their parents. And what we fail to do a lot of times is to ask about that child's perspective. Children are not included in the fostering process, or they're included randomly, and it's usually at adult discretion. So this can leave them confused when they're told to provide love, understanding, and patience, yet they don't get that back in return. So when you tell a child from their perspective, this person deserves or needs your love, or they need a little bit more understanding, more grace, because of the things and challenges that they've been through, we often don't think about the challenges that the children that are already there are facing or have as a result of not knowing and not being included in the process. And that children are expected to be competent and able to adjust in situations. These are little people. And if we treat them as if they're adults, then we're going to miss the mark, because we're not going to give them the support, right? The understanding and the listening ear that they might need in order to be heard throughout the process. The research pointed out that the fostering experience may be or can be seen as secondary trauma for birth children and children that are already in the family. Some of the reasons why is because children learn about trauma through what I like to call the pillow talk of kids. And this is when the lights go out and the children don't have anyone else to talk to, or they're scared to go to sleep, and then they share stories. Imagine being a child that hasn't been educated about foster care, that hasn't been told or had a conversation about why children come into care, and hearing that from your same aged peer. And children are going to talk about that experience the way that they felt it and the way that they have experienced it themselves. And that can be really traumatic and impactful to a child that's been kept away from some of the ills and things that happen to children and families. That's really difficult to think about. We see all of the things in social media, on the news, about how children are treated. But if we really try to shelter our children from different types of music and different types of video games and social media and things like that, then the first time that our children are hearing about the impacts on another child or the negative things that have happened to children might be from the child that joins the family. And what we know we have to do is we have to set the stage for what we want our children to know. And if they're distant from the process, then how much are we doing that? How much are we allowing our children to hear the story from us and have us as adults in their life frame it for them in a way that we would like to have it framed, so that they know that they are safe, so that when they hear a story that's impactful to them, they can come to us and they can have that conversation. Children also experience their parents' anxiety and stress throughout the fostering process. So it may be difficult to go through that process, to not know what to do when behaviors are erupting, to not know and understand some of the challenges and just the process of fostering as a whole. And just know that our children feel that. So children feel the stress of parents as they are, little balls of energy. They take that in. And if we're not talking to them about it, it can be internalized. And it can lead to further anxiety and stress. And it plays out not only in their family, but it plays out in places like school and in the community. And oftentimes they don't want to be the added stress, so they will not come and talk to parents. And if they don't have access to social workers and nobody's asking, or if they're not in therapy, because most times there is no support and services for the child that is not in foster care status. The opportunity has to be given to them according to their age and stage of development. So you're not having an expansive conversation with the 2-year-old, but what you are is reading to them maybe about how to be a foster family or how you became a foster family. And it's in appropriate words and language so that they can understand. But we're having these conversations early and often and continually so that they can grow along with the process and along with the family, feeling like they are an integral member of that foster family. So because parents and agencies are not resourced or willing, or they just don't know how to have a candid, courageous, caring conversation, disruptions sometimes are not preventable. So as we think about what can we do in order to push ourselves a little bit, in order to challenge ourselves, to make sure that families stay together, right? One child joins one family for the duration that they're in foster care until they can get back to their birth family or to a place of stability and permanency, whatever the permanency plan is. But we understand reunification is the first permanency goal. And that is our goal, to reunify children with families in the least amount of time possible, with them having the least amount of moves within the care system. Those are the things we want to do. So some of the things that also came out of the research are looking at the positives for children already joined with the family or that were already there. They can gain confidence, express feelings better. They enjoy having siblings to share activities with. They make lifelong connections. We know that the sibling relationship is the longest relationship that a child is going to have, far more than with their parent, far more than maybe with some of their peers is a sibling relationship, as well as it helps them to increase empathy for others. Unfortunately, this is some of the negatives, some of the challenges, right? Is that they have to share possessions in a bedroom, and that can be hard for children that have not had to do that in the past. The loss of parental attention can be impactful. I had an opportunity to hear a story about a young boy that was so proud that he looked like his dad. And everybody told the story about how much this guy looked like his dad. And those were moments that every single family member that came over talked about the resemblance. And there was a child that was joined with the family, and that child was moving into adoption. And as a result of this child, or the child joined with the family, not looking like anybody, everyone made the conscious choice to stop talking about how much this young guy looked like his dad. And when he was asked why he was often sad and what he was experiencing, what he told everyone, or told his parents, was that it made him feel bad that nobody ever talked about how much he looked like his daddy. And there was a really proud point for his, that he had a connection with his dad in that way. And now, as a result of the child joining that didn't look like anybody, people stopped talking about that on his behalf. That was impactful. And we didn't know that it was impactful until we asked, until we allowed him to talk about what was happening for him. So sometimes we're making decisions so that we don't hurt the child that's joining the family, and inadvertently, we're really impacting the child that's already there. So we have to think about it on both sides. We know that sometimes there's less time and attention and resources, that children sometimes compete for parental time and attention. There's a loss of maybe family closeness, as well as if you're a baby in the family, and then there's a child that is younger that joins your family, then your positioning in the family also changes. So sometimes the roles can change. As well as children have difficulty dealing with behavioral challenges of other children, and the fact that they're randomly included in the process. So some of the negatives, we have to think about what are the things that we can do to impact those negatives or challenges. Because if we take a family systems perspective and we change that lens, then just as a result of changing the lens, we have the opportunity to change some of those negatives into positives. So as when we think about, the loss of family closeness, how do we continue to bond? And how do we continue to make it family bonding? Because we understand that children are longing for that, and they're longing for the time and attention. So at this time, we'll take the opportunity to listen to Christine Hawkins talk, and to really be expressive about how she feels and how she was impacted by being a part of a foster family.
Hi, my name is Christine Hawkins. I am 18 years old, and I am the daughter of Arville Hawkins, who is a foster parent.
So, Christine, I want to ask you a few questions here. What was your experience with being a foster sibling?
Well, there are ups and downs to it. A lot more downs sometimes. Well, being a sibling to a foster kid, it takes a lot of work. You can get blamed for stuff, and sometimes you don't know why until you're on the receiving end of whatever punishment is given.
Okay, so the next question is, what do you want people to know, and what can and should be done differently?
Well, I want people to know and remember that we're still kids. That along with the foster kids that come into the house, we're still kids. We still have a long way for development, that we scar easy. When you bring people into the house, we're going to react differently. Sure, the first couple of days would be like having a friend over, but after that, it's hard.
I'm gonna ask you this question. What do you want workers to know, and what should they do to support families?
I definitely say I would have been more appreciative if I was also involved in when they gave out prizes or gave out gifts, because it's hard being a kid and going to all these events only to sit back and watch other kids, older and younger than you, get prizes and toys. And just seeing that makes you think, what did I do wrong?
Wow. Yeah, I do recall so many times we went to those dinners, events that they had, and why they even said bring the family.
Because the kids of the foster parents weren't even an active participant in most of the things. A lot of times you would just be sitting with your parents, not being able to do anything that the other kids did, because the event was for foster kids. They left out all the other kids.
I think that concludes.
I also wanted to say this.
Say it.
For a lot of the older children of the foster parents, a lot of times we'll just pull back. We'll just completely pull back so the parent can focus on the foster kids, because especially for the kids who've been with parents for foster kids for a long period of time, we'll just pull back, because a lot of times we see parents struggling and we try not to add to their struggle. So we pull back, we try to do what we can, and at times we just want something for ourselves. Like, all these years I wanted you to drive me to school. I never even thought of getting my license because the only time I actually got with you was when you drove me to school. Now, you might be thinking, well, you were on your phone the whole time. Well, I was still there. I still heard every word you said. I would always tap you just to reassure myself that you were still there, that you still paid attention to me at certain times throughout the ride.
I noticed that, and I was aware when the children would come into the room, you would leave, you would walk away, because you knew it was a lot, and gosh, it had been a lot. I saw you disappearing. more than often. And
especially since you tend to get younger kids.
Right. And had medical problems. So that was a lot on me, especially since I also had medical problems. And I just stopped coming to you asking for help, since a lot of times I would get the brunt of your attention. Well, I fully understand that. Dr. Eshell Williams, this is a very emotional time for Christine, and even for myself, because we're reliving some of the impacts, some of the pain, some of, trauma. Really, there was some trauma in there. And it is just not easy to bring in children into your home. And the children that come into your home, you involve them in your children's life. You don't exclude your children. It's not exclusive. This is not an exclusive club for the foster children. But this is us as a family.
She didn't feel like she was a part of the family. Being invited to a function put on by a foster family agency for foster children and not being able to be a part of that. one of the things that she said is she sat back and thought, what did she do wrong that she wouldn't be included? And I ask you, do we ever want a child to feel that way just as a result of being a part of a family that fosters? And what can we do on our end to ensure that there's not one child that feels that way when they walk away from an event that was intended to be supportive of a family? You also heard her talk about the fact that as she got older, that older children usually would distance themselves from the process because they didn't want to further, add to the challenges that their parents were having. How do we as a system be inclusive and become inclusive of the child, their full family, understanding the challenges that they're going to have so that we can support them to make sure that all of the children that are joined with that family remain? What are some of the small things? What can you do? What can you charge yourself with doing to make sure that there's not one child that feels like Christine in her explanation of the impact that fostering has had on her and her family? One of the things that I am proposing is the philosophy switch, and the switch from thinking about parents and children or parents and homes to thinking about families and children. The approach that we're going to talk about now is that family systems approach. And the family systems approach looks at the family as not individuals, but a cohesive unit. And as that cohesive unit, it places the emphasis on how all of the family members interact with one another. And if we think about how everyone interacts with one another, it's not only the child that joined the family, but it's everybody's interaction. And all of the interactions all of the time. We think about teaching families how to work together to understand their group dynamics. So when the child joins the family, what are the things that have changed so far? We know that sibling order changes, maybe birth order changes, the roles and responsibilities have changed. Now there's shared chores and different things like that. And we have a child that's joining the family that doesn't know anything about the way that this family works. So as we acclimate that child into a new environment, it is our responsibility to do that for everyone in that environment. And we think about how the behavior of one family member impacts the behavior of all family members. And as we think about that on a behavioral level, how do we problem solve around it? And not only on a behavioral level, we can think about it on many different levels. What is our problem solving strategy? And it has to be one of cohesion as well as support. So the family systems approach also says emotions like stress and anxiety, as you heard Christine talk about a bit, and some of the statistics from the disruption research also talked about stress and anxiety. So that stress and anxiety can begin to spread from one person to another in the family relationships. And it can also lead to tension and more serious challenges over time. So if we know that the stress and anxiety exist, what do we want to do along the way to decrease that level of stress and anxiety, to make sure that we are addressing it with every single family member? Because usually the family member that, takes things in the most, that things really resonate with them. And you can think about children that right, where they just take in everyone else's emotions. That person usually is the carrier of the most stress and anxiety in the family. And whether it be the child that joined the family or children that were already there, and it may also be a parent, we think about how is that person processing through that stress, and what are we doing as a family to wrap ourselves around that individual so that they don't have to go it alone. That's the family systems approach. That's the family system perspective. No one family member has to face what they're going through by themselves. We get and understand, we recognize that a change in one person sparks change in how other family members respond and feel. And we have to have a push that says, and we are a part of that family system as social services individual people that are coming from a social services background. The moment that we join with that family, the moment that we enter into that home, when we make that phone call, we now become a part of that family unit. And we too have to work together, right? So the family works together to find solutions. If there is a point of disruption, or if there's a point where people are feeling a little less enchanted by this fostering process, what are we supposed to do as social services professionals to support families to relieve the stress from the individual so that we can think about meeting the family where they are and supporting them and helping them develop as a whole? It's a far different perspective than coming into a family or asking questions to parents, and then they answer on everyone's behalf. What we have to know is that each family member might be at different points. And if we don't ask that, we miss it. And we might miss some of the things to disruption in families. So this family systems approach, no, it is not perfect, but what it is a different lens with which to view the family that says that each and every person, each and every member has a responsibility to remain supportive, cohesive, understanding, empathetic, so that the family can stay together. So a lot of what we talk about in disruption is really looked at, and some of the disruption pieces come from adoption and adoption lens. When children are adopted out of the care system and then they're going to come back into care. But what we are going to look at and focus on, and when we talk about this family systems approach, that also lends us to thinking about how do we get the child back home? And how many changes does this child go through as a result of being in the care system? We don't want to further exacerbate the trauma that a child has had because they have to leave one family and go to the next and the next and the next. There's lots of statistics, and Winnie said one, and she really talked about one from the Children's Law Center early on in the introduction, that children sometimes experience 5 families within the first year of being in care. And remember, that's 5 family systems that they have to try to adjust to. And is it not our responsibility to make sure that families are stabilized from the beginning with the supports that they need so that children can remain in as few families as possible until they get back home? It's a different approach, but it's one that is deserved and by the children. It's their right to be in loving families, nurturing, supportive, enduring until they get to permanency. So how do we do it? And we see a hashtag there, every foster family member matters, because they do. How do we ensure that every foster family member has, first and foremost, voice and choice? How do we ensure that they have voice and choice? Part of the way that we do that is we make sure that we ask, how are you doing? How are you feeling? Is this still working out for you? Any challenges? And we also want to think about what's working well. What are we doing that's really, really working? And then we make sure that they have the strengths. We point out strengths. You're really doing this well. We look at the skills. Do we have, and does our family have the skills that they need in order to support a child that has been impacted by loss and trauma? In order to support the family that is in the change pattern as a result of joining a child with their family? And how do we provide appropriate supports? And with supports, what are the appropriate supports? Those supports could be therapy. And we're talking about therapy in a mental health capacity from the beginning. Using your collateral sessions from the beginning to create balance in the family so that when other things happen, we're already starting from a stable place versus imbalance is happening. And then we come in and layer support and services after there's a challenge. We want to layer support and services from the beginning so that they know, and what we know is that this is a challenging process for families to go through until they get balance. and we help them find the balance. We do all of this to minimize trauma, because this approach can help prevent disruptions. And we think about, how are we going to have the candid, courageous, caring, collaborative conversation, right? We've got a lot of C's. How do we have the candid, courageous, caring, collaborative conversation with each and every family member on an age-appropriate level, so that they can understand what it means to be a foster family? What does it mean to be in a foster family? So that they can then explain that to someone else. We demystify the process. We walk away with an understanding that we are a family, and anybody that joins our family, even though it might be challenging in the beginning, we can find the balance to help make sure that children have safe, nurturing, enduring relationships intended to last a lifetime. Another way to do that is by unpacking the elephant in the room. And as we think about unpacking the elephant in the room, on the left side of the screen is you have parts of the elephant in the room. And on the right side of the screen, you see some words there. And I'm going to walk us through that. So as I walk us through unpacking the elephant, what we want to do is we want to draw a picture of the elephant smiling. Right now, he is not, she is not. And we want to reframe the words into a strength-based perspective. Talked about strength-based language. We've been talking, and you've been hearing me use it instead of the old language. And that's an effort to be on the healing side of a child's life instead of the hurting side. So some of the examples, if we start from the top of the elephant and go clockwise. So we look at denial. We want to turn denial into acknowledgement. How do we acknowledge that there are going to be some challenges, and there are, with joining children with our family? And whatever was the normal before, how do we create a new normal? We look at ignorance. We turn ignorance into being informed. Being informed is pre-service training, it's in-service training, it's ongoing development and ongoing support. And we make our children, all of the children, a part of the process. We really explain to children why they're in the care system, how it works, so that they know and understand and can ask questions and be advocates on their own behalf. We include children that are previously adopted, that children that are in foster care status in our family, children that we have there by birth, as well as children there that by kinship and kinship status, all in legal guardianship status as well. We want to make sure that they're not ignorant to the process that's happening. And we give them that by having voice and choice. We turn diversion into intervention. Instead of walking away from a problem, maybe acting like it doesn't exist. What are the interventions? What are the skills that we have in order to intervene in a way that's meaningful to get the family to a point where they're balanced and where they can handle the challenges that come up? And we understand that families can't do it alone. Children can't do it alone. We have to do it as members of a professional team. And that professional team is inclusive of every member in that family. We turn silence into voice and choice. There's nothing more powerful than feeling as if your voice matters, and that what you think and what you say and how you feel matters, and that something is going to happen on your behalf as a result of you speaking up for yourself. How do we give that to children? How do we give it to families? How do we make sure that we ask the question of how's everyone doing today? And that trunk down, we turn the trunk down into trunk up, right? So the trunk down sometimes means aggressive and means the behavior, it does not look, in a friendly manner. So turning it into a trunk up means that we are assertive and we can actually advocate for ourselves and get exactly what it is that we need from the people that we need it from. We turn awkwardness into being comfortable. We are comfortable in our family. We are comfortable with the discomfort that comes as a result of not knowing one another and blending a family together and asking tough questions and being able to say, I don't know, we become comfortable in the unknown and what's going to happen next because we have the support in order to do exactly what we need to do to meet the needs of our family. We turn avoidance and reluctance into moving forward. And as we think about what our move is forward, we move forward as a family, not disjointed, not a foster child, not a foster family, but just a family. And what does it mean for a child that maybe doesn't have they're living with their family right now, to be a part of your family, to feel as if they are safe, nurtured, and loved? And then we think about all of the other things, all of the other elephants in the room. And you can think about families that have brought them up to you. Think about in your own family, some of those things that never get addressed that need to in order for you to really just sleep well and rest easy. Those are the things that we want to unpack for families, and unpack with families and unpack with our own family. We want to unpack those things to demystify this process so that children feel safe, loved, nurtured, supported, until they can get to the permanency outcome. The fewer disruptions means an increase in resilience of families, an increase in confidence, comfort, and knowing that the system of care cares about all children equally, that they are willing to work on every child's behalf, not just a child in foster care status, but a child in any status, every single child in the family. And that is the overarching goal, family stability, to make sure that children are joined with families that are safe, nurturing, enduring, so that they know that they're going to get their needs met in the least amount of family systems as possible. I believe we can do it. I've seen it done. And I've seen it work, and I've seen families not give up on children. I've seen systems work together for the greater good of the child because it's their right. They deserve it. And just like the Hawkins family was able to talk to us and share their experiences, and I'm so grateful that they did, we give all of our families the ability to have candid, courageous, caring conversations with us, to say that this is not the easiest work that they have ever done, but they want to continue to do it. And they want to do it as a member of a professional team that understands that it may be wavy, it may be like this, but we can calm and we can bring some balance to that because of our perspective, because we are anticipating the challenges that families are going to have, and that every member is going to be challenged in some way. But every member is also listened to, and they're also included. So I think about this from the perspective of my family. I think about a system that was not able to give that to my family in the time that my mother was fostering. And I feel like we are at a point where we can change that narrative, where we must change that narrative. Because if it's not for the children, then who are we going to change it for? In terms of recommendations, it's how do we reframe the focus to be on families and children and not parents and homes. We want to provide training and ongoing consultation from Department of Children and Family Services, from Department of Mental Health, our foster family agencies and staff, to ensure they and their prospective and current resource families use best practices. And those best practices are going to be used through the recruitment phase, through the approval, through development of families, and through the ongoing support that they're going to receive. And our aim is to decrease the possibilities for secondary traumatic stress for all children and families. And we also are going to ensure that positive fostering experience for all resource family members. And this is going to impact recruitment and retention. We're going to make sure that we stay on the helping side of families' lives and children's lives instead of the hurting side. We're going to do this with cohesion and understanding that we are working for the same purpose, to make sure that children are reunified and they gain permanency. And we have to do this by collecting data and developing metrics to track our practice improvements and the impact that it's having on retention and recruitment. And if families didn't disrupt, we wouldn't have to recruit as hard as we do. If we were retaining families and they were so pleased with everything that we were doing and the support that we were providing and the experiences that their families were having, then they would go out and tell other families about what it means to foster, what it means to be a foster family, and other families would want to join in that process. So we have got an opportunity here to not only recruit and recruit and recruit and recruit, but we have an opportunity to prevent the disruption of families, retain them, and make sure that they go out and tell other people how amazing it is to be a resource to children and families. So we are about time, and I thank you for having me and allowing me to really just have a candid, courageous, caring conversation. As Winnie mentioned earlier, I am the child of parents that fostered all of my life, so I was voluntold into this. And as I did that, I wanted children to really have a place that they could see themselves. So I wrote a book. But Mommy, our last name isn't Foster, and it's talking to children, and not just birth children or previously adopted children. What about cousins and nephews and nieces and all of the children in your family that don't understand why children come into care or don't understand why you're a foster family? So it's talking to children about being a foster family. And the tagline on the back of the cover says, and this is from me to you. Throughout the years, foster families have struggled to articulate to their children and family members their choice, calling, purpose, and the overall need for foster care. I know the struggle all too well because this is where my parents found themselves many times. This book is my work of heart to assist my parents and other parents like them with having a candid, courageous, caring, collaborative, challenging conversation about being a foster family. So I hope that you have this conversation within your families and with the families and children that you serve. Thank you so much for spending this time with me and for having this amazing conversation.
Thank you, Michelle, so much for this really eye-opening presentation. We also want to thank Keela Burton for her amazing work on the production leading up to this event, UCLA Pritzker Center for their support, and Winnie Wexler for her support. My name is Rochelle Alley. I'm with the Foster Together Network. And one last ask we have of you is we greatly appreciate if you can fill out the survey that we are going to post in the chat. We use this information to plan future events. So please do take the 2 minutes to fill it out. And most of all, thank you for embracing these concepts and finding at least 3 ways to implement them in your work and hopefully to share them with your colleagues. We will be posting the videos online, and we absolutely would love if you borrow them and steal them and share them with others so that we can carry forward this message with your team. So thank you all for being advocates and putting this into operation.
Rochelle, I know we have a little bit of time. I don't know if we wanted to if there were some questions or people just wanted to make comments. I've seen a few things coming through the chat. I don't know how you feel about that.
I think that sounds fantastic. One thing I'll carry forward that somebody mentioned earlier as you were speaking was the importance of making sure to prepare space for full families to share when there are issues. I mean, you mentioned that the agency is the last to know because sometimes people are afraid that if they bring up an issue, the child will be transferred and joined with a different family, or that it's going to come back as a negative to them. And I think that's something I've heard you speak to before. I don't know if you want to speak a little bit to the concept of how you prepare families, that's the norm, that we should expect that bumps are going to come into the road. And how do we all encourage families to know that that's a safe thing to share and to work through together?
I think the important piece there, and thank you for asking that, is we want to make sure that families feel as if they have the space to do it. And we prepare them by going in and saying, hey, I know that this is challenging work. Any challenges? anything that you want to share with me. And if they don't, and if they're not saying it, you are giving your perspective and saying, I've worked with many, many families over the years. This is some of the challenges, or these are some of the things that families experience. And if you're saying that this is what they experience, then you can wonder with them. I wonder if this is something that your family has experienced as well. And if you bring it up, then it really lowers their defenses, and it lowers the anxiety that comes up that says they have to be perfect. We're not looking for perfect families. We are looking for families that have had challenges, that have had trauma themselves, because we know that families need transferable skills. If they've really been able to work through their trauma, we know that they are able to help other individuals work through their trauma. And that's what we need. Jessica says, normalize the challenges that families face. We have to make that a normal part of the everyday caring and working with children. I think this is an important topic that we can't keep here. Right? We've got to share this, and we've got to say, hey, I saw this today. Have we ever thought about it? Most people that I share it with, they say, you know, that's really something. This is the first time that I thought about that in that way. And if this is the first time that you've thought about it and want to continue that, then do it. You can do it with me. You can do it with your other colleagues.
Thank you. Thank you again to everyone. Thank you, Dr. Williams. Thank you, Kilo, Winnie, and UCLA Pritzker. And most of all, again, thank you to all of you. The ball's really in your court to take pieces of this and implement it in your practice and to share it widely and freely with your colleagues. So thank you very much.